Thank you for coming here. Hopefully, we'll try to keep everybody awake after this, this beautiful lunch. Thank you. My name is Daniela Saderi. I am the Executive Director and Co-Founder of PREreview. I have a background in neuroscience, and it is a big honor to be here today in the ancestral lands of the Nukchuktak that we currently call Washington, D.C. And I want to start with a little bit of just telling you a little bit about how I got here, and then we can move into the discussion on the future of peer review. The Washington, D.C. is actually a place that holds a special place in my heart because it is the first, for the first time back in 2016 is when I heard about the word, described what open science really was. I happened to get a fellowship to come to attend OpenCon in Washington, D.C. It was the week that Trump was elected in November. And I, for the first time, just stumbled upon a group of professionals and researchers through Agent of Change that were trying to understand the issues in science scholarship globally, and also trying to offer solutions that were really centered around equity issues, around accessibility, not just accessibility of papers, but like access to knowledge and how knowledge is produced, disseminated, and evaluated. And it was a lot to take in. But I also came back really energized and really committed to trying to do something. And I was in the middle of my PhD, and I knew that my PI really wanted me to complete that paper. But I also was like, what can I do? And just learned about preprints for the first time. Jessica Polka talked about the work at the Bio, and I had no idea what they were. It turns out that nobody knew what they were either in my department. And so we started reviewing preprints at journal clubs. And initially it was just a way to say, hey, preprints are actually a real thing. Like, we could be doing this. But it became this opportunity that shifted what journal clubs were altogether. So from, oh, why is this paper ended up in Nature? And like, let's discuss how smarter we are. That was kind of the attitude of the journal clubs. It shifted to being, let's figure out how can we provide constructive feedback and share it with the authors at a point in time in which actually matters. And so we started collecting those discussion points and sending them to the authors, and what we getting back was really amazing and kind of inspiring for what then became PREreview, and met two other inspired and inspiring people, Monica Granado, Samantha Hindle, and we co-founded PREreview. So I'm here today bringing you my perspective, but also the perspective of people that have inspired me throughout this career, obviously from John Inglis and their work at bioRxiv, which is what, my very first approach to what preprints were. The work that J. Boston has put forward and continuing to challenging models of scholarly publication. And more recently, getting to know Ashley Moses, a PhD student at Stanford, and we'll hear more from her, and the work that she's doing to bring, to really change and bring the voices of early career researchers into this dialogue. And Lisa Cuevas with the Center for Open Science will tell you more about the life science journals and how we can really think about bringing in community-led feedback to scholarly outputs that even come before preprints. As a way, to me personally, I think that that's a very good way to bring equity back to equation and think about how can we share knowledge at different point in times, or earlier point in times, in which we can rely on the feedback of the community of trust that we can create, that can shape how the research is going to be actually done. So the way that this is going to work, and it's a little bit different, I think, from all the other sections, but I'd like to start with hearing from the panelists and opening statements, and then I have some questions, but we'll see how it goes. And I would like to offer the opportunity to bring the microphone to you. So if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. I'll try to remember. If you prefer to stand up, please do that. But I'm also happy to move around. Sorry, cameraman. And bring the microphone to you if that's a better experience. So without further ado, Dr. Inglis would like to start.
Thank you, Daniela. I must say I'm delighted to be part of this, and I'm very grateful to Daniela for the invitation to be on this panel, and to Nick and Amy for putting this whole very interesting day together. So in our instructions, we panelists were asked to explain our positionality on the topic of peer review. This is a word I have not come across before, so I'm interpreting it loosely. As a co-founder of bioRxiv and medRxiv, I obviously want to talk about peer review from the perspective of preprint servers. And I have to say that much of what I planned to say was said much more eloquently this morning by Adam. But I do have two other small perspectives. I'm also a faculty member at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, where I am engaged in mentoring grad students, serving on thesis committees, advising postdocs, generally being embedded alongside working scientists at different stages in their careers. So I am made constantly aware, even if I don't necessarily want to be, of scientists' frustrations with a publishing system that all too often to them seems obstructive rather than helpful in moving science forward. And my third perspective is that I'm also the director of a not-for-profit press that publishes 9 journals, including research journals that operate peer review in a fairly traditional way. And they are staffed by scientifically trained editors who also want to serve the community and also want to move science forward as fast and effectively as possible. And they are frustrated, often, by lack of cooperation from the community members themselves. So the principal focus of all of this dissatisfaction is, of course, journal-based peer review as we know it. Now, it can be and should be enormously helpful. And many scientists are entirely willing to acknowledge that it often is, but much more often, peer review from an author's perspective is slow, sometimes uninformed, frequently requires additional and sometimes pointless experimental work, and all of this is accompanied by multiple rounds of resubmission and revision, which the authors largely put up with in order to gain the perceived career benefit of publication in a journal that matters when it comes to promotion, tenure, grants, awards, and other forms of academic recognition. So in short, peer review as we know it currently is too often exhausting and at best inefficient, not just for authors, but for editors and, of course, the greatly overburdened reviewers as well. We launched the preprint server bioRxiv 10 years ago, not to bring down the journal publishing system, but with the conviction that uncoupling the distribution of research from its evaluation would address the community's principal frustration with traditional publishing, its slow pace. And it did. With screening, rather than peer review, an author could see her work out in the world in 2 days, rather than months or years. And because it was free to access and discoverable, the content on bioRxiv began to attract millions of readers. And by 2019, bioRxiv had become sufficiently established for Mike Eisen, Richard Sever, and I to write a paper, first of all proposing that funders should mandate preprints in order to solve the problem of public access to science, but in addition arguing that if more and more research became available in preprint form, there would be opportunities to improve how research was evaluated, how it's done, when it's done, by whom, and for what purpose. And now there are numerous initiatives attempting to evaluate research in new and innovative ways. Some have been mentioned already: eLife, Review Commons, Peer Community In. These operations use formal peer review to which authors opt in. And this has produced now over 9,000 preprints on bioRxiv and medRxiv that have peer reviews that are visible on the servers. And there are other projects like MIT's Rapid Reviews and Daniela's PREreview, which in PREreview's case takes a more community-based approach to evaluation. bioRxiv tries to link to all these kinds of activities, helping readers get a more rounded view of a reported piece of work. So when peer review no longer slows down or even prevents dissemination, it can become more of what authors really want it to be: thoughtful, constructive, respectful, and interactive. In other words, a conversation among peers intended to improve the reporting and the interpretation of work and help move a field forward. bioRxiv and medRxiv themselves do not and will not do peer review. They do screening for appropriateness and minimizing risk, but not quality control. The details between the servers are a little different, but both depend entirely at the moment on the expertise of an amazing group of human beings. But we are intrigued by the promise of automated tools, not just for detecting plagiarism, which we have now, but for uncovering fraud of various kinds, for ensuring image integrity and ethics compliance, data and code deposition, and things of that sort. And the use of content verification tools of this kind could result in the application of certain signals of trust to a preprint. That would benefit the authors. But if those signals were permanently attached to the manuscript, it could also assist the journals that end up publishing that preprint. And more than 70% of preprints on our service are published in journals. So then comes the work of evaluation, which we've talked about so much today already. How well or otherwise the work was done technically, how valid the controls were, the correctness of the statistical analysis, the appropriateness of the author's interpretation, and so on. And then finally, there is the work of identifying the importance and significance of that work for the field. Now, this is work typically done at the moment by journals, but it could also be undertaken by self-organized groups of experts, perhaps centered in a scientific society or an institution that have domain expertise. And since we're talking about practicalities in this workshop, I should point out that a preprint first publishing system where content is already hosted on a server and can be readily updated, it's not hard to see how the goal of open access, peer-reviewed publications could be delivered at much less cost than they are being delivered right now. The momentum behind preprints in biomedicine is continuing to grow, and bioRxiv and medRxiv will reach new milestones in volume this year. Some funders are mandating preprints, others are considering it. And as Adam said this morning, there is an opportunity to use this moment to rethink peer review. Does every scientific report really need to be peer-reviewed? Does it need to be done in the same way in computational neuroscience as it is in biochemistry? Does every aspect of every paper need the same group of people to review it? And how could different kinds of review be done for different kinds of audiences, such as experts in adjacent fields or even the general public? So as we rethink the process, what about the people? In the past, taking on peer reviewer responsibilities was an integral part of being an academic. It was expected as a form of community service on the understanding that one both gave and received within that community. We live in much more transactional times now. And in today's hyper-competitive research environment, many more scientists would like to receive the benefits of peer review than are willing to offer their time to do it. So how do we expand the pool of reviewers? How do we make it more inclusive and invite diverse voices into the process? Perhaps most importantly, what adjustments can we make in the system of academic reward and recognition to achieve these goals? I have a lot more questions than I have answers, but I've used my time and I must hand the mic back to Daniela.
Thank you. Thank you. That was great. And please, let's go ahead. Put them very nicely in line. So just please, AJ.
All right. Thank you, Daniela. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Nick, for letting me be here today. I was just telling John while we were sitting up here, he mentioned Plan U, and I mentioned that sometimes I'll get in a fit and I'll start writing something that I'm really excited about, and I'll get to the end and it's like, I just reinvented Plan U. So hopefully what I present to you today is something maybe a little bit new and not just a regurgitation of Plan U. My name is AJ Boston. I'm a scholarly communication librarian at Murray State University. That's my positionality. Thank you. That's what it means. We're a public regional in Kentucky. Our students and faculty do conduct research, but we are a teaching first university. So my perspective may be a little bit different here. As I was telling Sammy over lunch and Curtis here at breakfast, I'm teaching a scholarly communication class online right now, and I have 9 undergraduates, and they did not know what they were signing up for when they took the class. They saw 3 credits that were asynchronous, so they took it. So I say that to say that I'm ready to get into the weeds about peer review with you all here today. In my other tab on my computer, I have a class where I'm just trying to really set a basic foundation of what peer review is, kind of introducing what the different conflicts are, some of the different proposed solutions. And as I'm in the process of presenting those pros and cons of the different models of open and anonymous peer review, I find myself coming to the conclusion that each type of review really does have its merits, which will appeal to different individuals. So I feel like we should let all forms of peer review kind of live out their destinies, so long as those routes are performed in good faith, backed by evidence, and with the objective of strengthening the scientific record. But alongside my sense that we should let peer review models live and let live, I'm also interested in seeing the development of a living taxonomy to describe the common and less common aspects of assessment that can occur in a peer review. With a taxonomy, I think it would be possible to describe what took place in a review, and consequently, you could then look at a paper and understand what areas have and haven't been discussed up to that point. Again, I think you should let your peer review be double anonymous, single anonymous. I think I'm using the right NISO terminology there, or open, or with or without a journal. But however that review takes place, I think the aspects of review that took place, I think those have the potential to be described and cataloged in a standard way. Now, I don't think you necessarily have to reveal the content or identities for that review, though that would be very nice in a lot of cases. But a description of what aspects were covered during a review could and should become a matter of open metadata. If we gain that sort of inventory of assessment areas, journals could improve their processes, and freelance reviewers, I think they can make better decisions on how and where to spend their energy. If we itemize a list of review aspects, we might compile and display a paper's review history, semi-agnostic of the source. We might even uncover relevant assessments in places we don't normally think of as peer review, like in the citing literature. If we itemize assessments of review, that could give us a better basis for defining what words like rigorous mean in hiring, funding, and promotion situations. Finally, an itemization might also allow us to decide how many steps exist between a verified preprint and a peer-reviewed preprint. So I know all of this probably sounds easier. It's easier said than done, but I think it's technically possible, and I think the benefits could be worth the trouble. So thank you.
Thank you. I love that idea. Thank you. Lots to say about it, but I'm just gonna keep it for later. Thank you. Ashley, please take it out.
Hello? Is this working? Cool, okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Ashley Moses. I'm a PhD student, or candidate actually, at Stanford University. I'm also the executive director of a nonprofit called The Civilian. So we work with researchers to create lay summaries of their publications so that the public can understand what's going on. Of the millions of publications we publish each year, most of those cannot be understood by those who are non-scientific. So what are we doing about that, and how can we make research more accessible? So for this conversation, I come with 3 main positionalities or identities that I thought I would mention. One, I am a researcher, so I am actively engaging in the research process, trying to get that PhD. So I understand some of those nuances. I've also been a member of different types of laboratories, so some of the biggest laboratories with the biggest of budgets, and then also some of the smallest and newest of laboratories with the smallest and newest of budgets. And I've seen how the research enterprise differentially weighs on those sorts of groups. And then finally, I come as a disillusioned student, hoping to be a part of the change and really excited to be here and to talk about it. So my focus when we talk about peer review is on accessibility and community engagement, specifically thinking how the non-scientific public engages with the work that we publish. So we are experiencing a publishing integrity and a science integrity crisis at the moment. This large spread of misinformation is also a public health issue. And on top of that, digital media is just exacerbating the issue. And so how are we thinking about that when we think about peer review? And so some questions that I want us to think about and that I think about often is, how might our published work be interpreted? But better yet, how might it be misinterpreted? And how does the work that we are producing fit into the broader conversation that society is having? And then finally, how can we encourage trust and positive information rather than distrust and the spread of misinformation? And thank you, I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you, Ashley. I'll come back to the trust point. Please, Lisa.
All right, everyone can hear me? Yes, I can hear myself. Thank you, Daniela. Thank you, Amy and Nick and everyone. My name is Lisa Cuevas Shaw. I'm with the Center for Open Science. And so I wanted to give a little bit of context, my positionality as well. As the name would suggest, the center is focused on openness, integrity, and reproducibility of research. We see our work to advance open science as fundamentally about culture change, and that has come up prior, obviously in the morning sessions. Specifically, we are enacting a theory of change that posits that stakeholders, all of us in the room essentially, need to make it possible for researchers to do open science, to make it easier to do it, to relieve that burden of cost, of time, all of that, frustrations, to help communities make it normative, to make it rewarding. We've talked a lot about that as well, and also make it required. And so our organization is literally structured around that theory of change. We have an infrastructure team that develops open source public goods infrastructure called the Open Science Framework. And that is a collaboration tool infrastructure that allows you to go through the research lifecycle and make the process of research fully open end to end. We've got about 750,000 registered users on the Open Science Framework. We've experienced nonlinear growth for the past 10 years. They're not all active, but we have gone, I think, well beyond the proof of concept of something being out that's of need, right, among the research community. So we're continuing to work on that. We have a policy team that works on advocacy and implementation of open science. Some of you may be familiar with the transparency and openness principles, the openness promotion guidelines. So that literally walks through and kind of talks about the standards of how to do open science well and what is required around that. We've got a lot of journals who have signed on as signatories to the top guidelines and have adjusted their journal policies accordingly. We have a community engagement team to work closely with researchers to understand needs. We get to learn from communities. There's so many different needs, and so we're not trying to foist open science onto communities, but really learn kind of in situ, right, what those needs are, what the difference is, and different kind of solutions for that. And then we have a research team, a meta science team that actually studies and evaluates behavior and initiatives that we take on. So that's just a little bit of context on the center. Relative to the topic at hand, peer review, I think my perspective is grounded in a lot of what we've talked about already, but just a few things that a shared aim among us is to improve the quality of research production, consumption, and evaluation, to accelerate the advancement of knowledge, solutions, and treatments, and to do so in an equitable and inclusive manner. It's, in my perspective, it carries the belief that to continue on a trajectory of improving research and scholarship in an equitable and inclusive way, we need to change the rewards and incentive part of the endeavor. So we've talked about that. We need to move away from placing the utmost value on getting published to getting research and scholarship right. And Adam spoke about that. Colette spoke about that this morning as well. Obviously, all of us have been kind of chiming in there. That the current peer review system really is anchored on that rewards and incentive structure. So, and of course, the scholarly publishing is as well. And there's space for that paper, right? Obviously, the findings, writing that up, making sense of it, all the interpretations, absolutely make sense. But the paper is recognized as the most important currency and output, and I believe that needs to change. My basic positionality on peer review is that it's highly advantageous to invite evaluation and peer review throughout the research life cycle, but at the very least earlier than we formally do now. So it might be at the question and study design. Obviously, there are publishing formats that do that, registered reports model. Some of you may have heard of that. That actually invites peer review at that stage. And then there's an in-principle acceptance following that peer review process to publish regardless of the findings. If they come out negative, that's fine. We're publishing it. We just want to see what happened after you posed that question and did your work. Recognizing that we already have a problem with sustaining peer review as it is, so there is a peer review crisis, a big burden. I think the second piece to my own positionality is just that it's worthwhile to test ways in which we can reduce the burden of evaluation of at least those markers of credibility, those markers of trust. But we need to do it in a way that does not perpetuate institutionalized biases and that invites researchers fully into the process of experimenting and experiencing multiple means of evaluation, whether that be through AI, ML, and then obviously the traditional kind of human evaluation. One last thing, and then I'll turn it back over to Daniela. At the center, the kind of practical application of this perspective and positionality relative to the evaluation of research includes some R&D and some pilot testing that our research and infrastructure teams do to test the effectiveness of technology to assess various research outputs and confidence in claims. So there's been a lot of fascinating work on how successful algorithms, we've had competitions, different things, how that compares even to human assessment. So all of that, if you're ever interested, happy to talk about that. But the recently launched pilot, it's called Lifecycle Journal, and we really struggled with that name. It's kind of anchored on a traditional format. It probably should better be titled Lifecycle Peer Review. This is a 3-year pilot to essentially run 20 to 30 studies through evaluation throughout the research process by a combination of evaluation through evaluation services, so largely open source services, but not exclusively so. There will be some commercial solutions as part of kind of that marketplace, and human peer review. And so it's going to kind of introduce some innovations that will transform, I think, the vision and values of journals into effective facilitators of knowledge production and self-correction. That's what we're hoping for throughout that process. So that's that. I'll turn it back to you.
All right, so now it's like, what question do I ask after all of this? So I'm very willing to just go to the audience super quick, but one thing that I want to kind of emphasize here is like this thread of like that change is needed. We are all here, and I think I would invite you all to like identify that there is a common thread in this room, even amongst those of us that have possibly slightly different values or thinking about, where we should go, what's the future of peer review, what's the future of scholarship. And one question that I think that I always want to try to bring to the surface when I'm trying to figure out what is the vision for that future is like understanding who holds the power and who holds the power to change. And what I've been trying to tell myself to be in this business is that I think that we all hold different powers in the groups that we represent, the identities that we have. And but I think in the vision of like a large chain with a scale that we're thinking about, we really necessitates coordinated change and different stakeholders. There are researchers, there are publishers, there are funders, and like who, like the question that I want to turn back here is like, who has the power, if you can each kind of bring about like to like bring that change and coordinate that change across different institutions. And I know funders is going to be one of the answers, but like the other thing is like, what behaviors do you think stakeholders that might be thought as having less power can change to each actually bring us closer to that vision that you have? So I can start if that helps. Like and a pre-review, I really believe that a question constantly, who is a peer reviewer, right? And the idea that someone with expertise or someone that belongs to that research institution that I really well recognize, therefore they must be an expert, is something that we really need to challenge within ourselves. And opening up the idea that there are experts out there that might not have the recognition or the pedigree or the experience that you would right now mentally associated with expertise is going to help us a lot in that peer review crisis of not finding enough reviewers, and especially enrich the discussion when we can bring in conversations, for example, from patients and from communities that are directly affected from the research that we're doing. And so valuing that expertise, and so working on that, like how, and I hate the word empowers, because that means that we're giving out power to others. But right now, I think just creating the infrastructure so that everybody has the power to actually come in and be part of that change is what I really like to think about. So I don't know if I made any sense with the question. Pick up on any of that or something different. Do it like our politicians. I wish that you asked me that question. You're welcome to do that. And then we'll open up to you all. If that's okay. I think we have 40 minutes. That's pretty good. All right, who wants to go next?
Okay, we're just gonna check every time. Okay, so I love that question, and I think it's a really hard one. I think I first want to emphasize that I do think students and early career researchers can make a difference and should make a difference. I think the area that I am most interested in and perplexed by is the tenure track administration. So the focuses and the incentivization within academia, I think, are a little bit messed up and can be more directed towards societal impact as part of scientific impact. And so what is the researcher doing outside of just the name of the journal or the prestige or this sort of impact factor? But how is this researcher, improving society, which is why we do science, right? Or this is why we do what we do, is to change the world and to explore the world. And if that could be emphasized, how cool would that be? Those are my thoughts.
I'll take it from the angle of, you kind of asked about power and maybe it's, power to change or to help. And I think, the answer is not, this is a systems problem. So it has to be a coordinated, kind of approach to change. A lot of times folks will certainly go to funders because that's going to, obviously be the most natural incentive. And I think to a large degree that is true. And we're seeing a lot of advocacy and difference and change across funders, which is wonderful. For me, I think the big linchpin really does sit at the rewards and promotion and the institutional level. And again, there's a lot of activity happening, but that takes time as well. But again, I would say that in terms of power, it's got to be a coordinated effort. So I don't know that I've answered the question, but just acknowledging that it's got to kind of reside evenly and be accepted, from those different angles to propel things forward, and to have then, this is a conversation about peer review, have peer review do its job and do it better, right?
I'm hoping this will come out into something coherent, because here's a few things I'm thinking. I think who holds the power are the people in charge of the bureaucracy. So whether you're a publisher and you have the intake, you have this, you design the submission process. So every button you have to click or input represents a power that you hold. with that contract, with the eventual contract. Publishers, funders, whenever you submit a grant, the way that those grant applications have been formulated, when you apply for tenure, the way those forms look as well, there's just all these little nudges in there that you have a lot of power to affect small scale change on an individual level that would be, that makes for a big widespread change. I was gonna say that I feel like in some ways there's a bit of a, if you build it, they will come. If you build a brand new preprint repository, some people will come, but as we talked about earlier, we have data repositories and not everyone is willingly coming to those. So it's not always true if you build it, they will come. There has to be something where you build it and you stick, just to Lisa's point, you either have the proper stick or carrot to get you to, once it exists, you have to have the proper stick or carrot to use that thing. And then once you're in it, the entire design of how you interact with those mechanisms, there's just so much unspoken power in that.
I love that quote. It's actually in most of my presentations now, but it's also like, I think that what was talked before, which is the idea of building with the input of the users, right? So that's like the first thing, like I had a vision of what PREreview would be, and it's like, it changed completely with the input of everyone, and specifically like who are the voices that first we're listening to. I think it's very important for the change you want to see. So thank you for that. And again, it wasn't a well-formulated question, but like you're all taking it to your own points. So thank you for that. I don't know if Johnny, you have anything to add?
I think that you know, we have at the moment a system of recognition of individual scientists and scientific advances that is based very much on journals, on fairly conventional journals, and the fairly conventional process of peer review. I think we're beginning to see the emergence of something that could be much more complex, nuanced, that essentially represents the accumulation of signals of significance that are delivered by a whole variety of people within the community, not just by 3 anonymous peer reviewers. It's going to take a lot of time to overcome what we currently have, because the system of academic recognition and advancement is so bound up with how journals work and which journals you get to publish in, and so on. I think we can see the signs of change. And at a sort of micro level, I think we are seeing change within institutions and perhaps within groups of within those who are funded by particular organizations. I'm looking at you, Bodo, where the evaluation is based on something different to which journal accepted your paper. Now it's going to be a complicated process making that shift, but I think it's beginning, and I think the way you have to begin is to allow as much scientific output into the world as you can, with certain constraints, but that corpus of work and corpus of knowledge should be allowed to be shared. And then the process of evaluation can take place in a whole variety of ways after that. And I think if preprint servers have any kind of contribution to make, then I think it's that they are channels for large bodies of knowledge with some constraints and some assessment and some screening, but not too rigorously and on defined bases. And then the community can weigh in a whole variety of ways over the course of work as it evolves.
Thank you. Big fan of options. So wouldn't be pre-review without preprint server, so big fan. So you all like to stand, so I'm also happy to bring, but we'll start from there. If someone would like me to bring the microphone to them, I'm happy to do that as well, but there is already a line, so all right, let's start over there just this time. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Lisa Janicki Henschliff at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So I was struck by something that John said, which of course I've seen Richard Seaver say on Twitter more than once, which is, does everything need to be peer reviewed? And every time I hear that, I think, yeah, but how would we know which ones? But I guess I want to actually take that thought just a little bit further and ask ourselves, or ask the panelists to, does anything need to be peer reviewed anymore? I mean, I understand total lots of ramifications for journals, but like just fundamentally what we think peer review is doing for us, does it need to happen anymore at all? Are we trying to fix something that we should just get rid of? So in some ways, I'm also asking for any of you to be willing to give an apologetics for peer review, because I think we hear a lot about how it's broken, it doesn't work, blah, blah, blah. But in some ways, we still seem to be trying to fix it, so we still seem to think there's some value in it. And that's something I haven't really heard about. What's the future value of peer review?
That's a good question. I had something less coherent written for my next question, so that's awesome. Is peer review even needed?
I get the poison chalice. So do we need peer review? Yes, I think we do. It doesn't have to be done in the way that it is currently done, and there are lots of experiments in changing that. But when you have an increasing mass of scientific information emerging worldwide, any practitioner of science needs pointers of some kind to know what to read. And peer review, when it's conducted properly, can be immensely helpful to authors. And there are many, many examples of authors who have had experience of going through peer reviews at a whole variety of journals, not just the bold-faced names, but community-based journals too, and who find the process enormously beneficial. And I do not feel that we should be throwing peer review out. We can certainly change it in how it's done. We don't have to, in my view, peer review absolutely everything. But I think the community evaluation of an individual's work, if done effectively, can be constructive and helpful to the individuals concerned. This is not to do with whether you get into a bold-faced journal or not. I'm talking about how to improve the quality of the reported science, which I think is what peer review essentially is really for. The question of publication selection is a whole other matter.
So earlier, John used the phrase signals of trust. I think we do need signals of trust, and peer review can be one of those signals of trust. And I think maybe one of the problems is when thinking about peer review as a signal of trust is sometimes peer review is not well defined in what signals we're supposed to be taking about that trust. Peer review varies across journals. The students I'm talking to right now, they all have a different idea of what peer review does and doesn't do. So I think it's not so much a matter of peer review being broken as just like, what do you mean when you say peer review? What is peer review? What do we think? What do we expect to be accomplished, and what is actually being accomplished? So I think having more granularly defined signals of trust within that, I think it would be less broken if we knew what was supposed to be happening there.
Hello? Yeah. Okay. Third time's the charm. I was just going to echo what AJ said. At its core, peer review is meant to be, it's meant to ensure that published research materials kind of satisfy this set of scientific standards and scientific quality. And when it comes to communities and those that are outside of the scientific enterprise engaging with these materials, signifying that you can trust this. Our community has established that this is something that we're putting out into the world for people to consume. That's the ideal version, maybe, but I think peer review establishes some sort of trust and credibility that is important for those that are not in the scientific community as well.
My 2 cents is that I'd like to change what that means in the sense of like, let's shift it to constructively help rather than tear it down. But that's, Bodo?
Actually, mine builds on Lisa's questions, and also goes back to what John said at the beginning, that peer review is treated as a community service that scientists are more eager to receive than to give. And my proposition is, and I mean, it's also a question really, to look at peer review as scholarship. The name peer review has, of course, scholarship all over it. I mean, it can only be done by peers of the authors. It's scholars that are doing it. And if we really embrace it as scholarship, we may be able to incentivize it, I mean, better, and it may also become more useful. And it may also help us to decide what papers need reviewing. It's the papers that somebody wants to write a review report on. Those are the ones that are worth reviewing. A scholar should decide what they work on, and that, I would argue, includes peer review. And when they write a peer review report, I would think as scholarship it should be published. It doesn't have to be signed. Scientific evidence can work without an author. It can work by the evidence in the piece, but the piece needs to be there. So my argument would be, let's treat it as scholarship. That means an article is only called a peer-reviewed article if the peer reviews are actually visible. Not the peer reviewers' names, but the peer reviews. That's science. If somebody claims they have a discovery and they don't show the data, we send them packing and say, that's not science, show the data. Peer review is data. It's scientific evidence, and that's what it should be. And that can also then drive what is being peer reviewed, because it's what somebody else wants to peer review and what they want on their CV here's a report that I've written. It's a scientific product. And I loved also, Lisa, what you said about starting to do that earlier. Confidential peer review is useful. It helps authors to put something, to improve something. That's more like that's also scholarship, but that's more like collaboration. That we can recognize this through they can become authors, or they can be recognized in the paper. Yeah? So there are ways for us to treat peer review as scholarship. And that, I think, helps to address a lot of the issues that we are trying to solve with it. And so well, the question is, what do you think of this positioning? Sorry, yeah.
Agreed.
I think, Bodo, what you're implying is that peer review all too often is seen as punishment. And in fact, it should be a collaborative, community-based activity designed to improve and help. But all too often it's seen as adversarial in a variety of different ways. Oh yeah, this is not to do with being nice to people at all, but it is to do with being helpful. And I think we haven't yet developed enough of the kinds of systems that enable that. But my argument is that if you add to the process the pressure of getting work out into the world, then it makes everybody crazy. It makes the author, the editor, the reviewers crazy. But the benefit of having work available to the widest readership is that everybody can weigh in. And if we build the infrastructure properly, then we can surface the conversation that goes on around an individual piece of work.
Thank you for pitching PREreview. Who is next?
3 panels, 3 questions. I do feel obligated to thank Amy and Nick for putting this together, and everyone who's been on the stage. This has been absolutely a fantastic morning. So for this question, I'm Jonathan Starr, and I'm going to add a different occupation here. I'm one of the 7 founders of the Science Commons Initiative, which is a nonprofit that largely supports a project called the Berkeley Open Infrastructure for Network Computing, which is a giant distributed computing network where anyone can contribute their computation powers to a researcher who has set up a project on this platform and do science. And through doing that science, through that contribution to this process, they become part of the output and they feel personally invested in the research, and hopefully they believe it more when a paper is written. So this question is largely directed to AJ and Ashley. AJ, you mentioned earlier something called freelance peer reviewers, which I think is very interesting and worth unpacking in itself. And Ashley is just science communication. So what do you think, or what would be the ramifications of bringing the general public into the peer review process, where I'm not a researcher or domain expertise. I can read a piece of research and speak to whether or not it's good or not. Do I understand it? Do I think his methodology is good? And that means something, maybe not as much as a domain expert, but it still means something to whether or not that is peer-reviewed research.
So I think earlier I said we need to better define what peer review is, and maybe in this case we might want to better define who the general public is. So I think there's some different ways that individual groups within the general population might do well with being brought in to do peer review. I feel like I saw a study where they had lay people look at studies, and if it didn't make sense to them, there was like a higher probability that there was actually something wrong with the report. So maybe just kind of a general purpose sniff test could be a sort of thing. But then also, I think we talked earlier about patients. I think if you're a patient with a rare disease, like you are more qualified to talk about that than most other experts out there. So I think those would be the types of people to bring in for review. And then I think about Dr. Elizabeth Bick. I think she's not like I don't think she's associated with it. She's freelance. She's her own, like, you could say like she's a general member of the public, but she's really not. So like, you know what I mean? Like she is part of the general public, but if you think about how many other types of people like that are out there, retired academics, like if you include those sorts of people, I think that would be certainly fine. I think maybe what you're asking is like, what could go wrong with bringing
wrong, or how would it help this trust in science problem?
I think, Ashley, I think you've got something here.
I'm just going to echo also what you said. I thought that was wonderful, and thank you for the question. And your work sounds awesome, so I would love to talk about that as well. I think if we're going to include accessibility and community impact as sort of these like fun phrases and words that we're going to include in peer review, then having people of the community is going to be an important part of that. I think patients and other sort of stakeholders that we've mentioned are really important, but also just thinking about what the people of the public, like what some of their needs are, you know, like talking to the customer. We were talking about this at lunch, like talking to the users, seeing what they want and what would be helpful. I often equate academic research to studying like a grain of sand on the beach and being like so obsessed with that grain of sand. And sometimes we do need to look at like the shore and the coastline, or consider other beaches or something like that. And I think that the public can really help with that, at least for insight of ideas, and especially in a clinical sense. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Just to throw back to the freelance reviewer, all I meant by that was someone who was not organized into the review by a journal, someone that just any sort of open peer reviewer. So just to clarify that.
Thank you. I think there would be an enormous value for everyone if we did that, and I'd love to talk more. Please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Natalie Ward. I work at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and my question is very similar to yours. I'm curious, Daniela, is peer review currently bringing in patients and patient advocates into the review process, or do you have plans to do so? Where's your thinking on that, and how can we make it happen?
So we actually have been talking with Andra and other colleagues at Heidi and Rarest One. So I would love to actually pilot, and we just submitted a pitch for the initial collaboration. We had a call with some groups of Rarest One. And for those of you who don't know, is a CZI funded group that funds and supports capacity building for patient driven organizations. And so I actually firmly believe that there are groups like indigenous communities, patients, and specific, and also the individuals in the general public can bring a lot. So we are hoping to start a pilot, but we're approaching this with a very humble, what is your value that it may be for you to contribute? And really, when I think about trust, for me, that we talk about trust in do we trust these new groups to come in and mess with our work? To us, the trust is how do I build the trust with you, person that has been told traditionally that you don't have a place, that actually you can bring value here? And that's what I'm most interested in. So I hope that if we do this work together, we'll learn something and work with them to really figure out opportunities to build on each other's knowledge and support. So hopefully it's in your hands. No. Yeah, please.
I just wanted to add one more thing. I realized I actually have a little bit of information on actually bringing the public into the process. So at the civilian, part of our editorial process is to have these lay summaries reviewed by academic folks. So those are people currently doing research. And then after we've created this finalized version of a lay summary, we bring in members of the non-academic public to review. So folks that are retired, my grandmother, non-scientific grandmother, folks, local high schoolers, these people that can basically just check if what we're doing is kind of appropriate. And when you think of misinterpretation and the spread of misinformation, I think that's more important now than ever. So I do think it could be very helpful.
Steph Bertozzi, editor of Rapid Reviews in Infectious Diseases. Just building on what John said and what Lisa said and what Bodo said about this, the value potentially of peer review. When I explain to our students what peer review is, I take a clinical metaphor and I say, it's like doing a diagnostic test on a patient. And the test is of greatest value, not when you know the patient has the disease or when you know that they don't, but when you don't know. So if you're actually flipping a coin, that's where peer review is the most useful. In this case, the diagnosis is, can we believe the result of this scientific manuscript, right? And the problem I have that I struggle with, and I assume everybody else struggles with in here, is that we take a one-size-fits-all approach to that. And I think we need the equivalent of precision medicine. We need precision peer review. So I have now twice responded to a journal to say, I'm declining to do a review of this manuscript, not because I'm not qualified or whatever, but because there's no value add to peer reviewing this manuscript. Unless you want me to comment on how well written it is or fix the grammar, because they're reporting an observation. I can't know whether they're lying about the observation or not. There's no value to having peer review of this, right? Set it to a copy editor or leave it on the preprint server, right? At the same time, we have other manuscripts that come in where sending it out to just a regular peer reviewers doesn't make any sense. And I used to work with the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. They spend thousands of person hours doing very complex mathematical models, write it up for the Lancet. It goes out to a peer reviewer who reviews the English. They can't possibly know whether they actually use the right model, right? So it's both too much and too little. And I think we need to figure out a way where we answer the question that was asked before, which is, how do you know which ones need peer review? I think that needs to be asked all the time. And then the peer review that we do needs to be tailored. So I haven't figured out how to do the complex one, right? Where I want a statistical reviewer, I want a biological methods reviewer, and I need somebody who actually understands the topic, tuberculosis or whatever it is, right? That's beyond my capability to organize. And at the same time, I just choose not to review the things that I think shouldn't be reviewed. But nobody gets credit for it then. So they have to be reviewed, which is stupid and wasteful. So I do think we need to fix this question, sort of titrate the level of peer review, both more and less than what we're doing now. And I just don't know how to do it. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas.
Just one comment on that, and this is the Life Cycle Journal or Life Cycle Peer Review Project. As I mentioned, it's going to be 20 to 30 studies. It is going to be multiple disciplines, and we're bringing together at least 15, more than a dozen different evaluation services. Those services are not all going to be fit for purpose across different disciplines, different studies, different methodologies, all of that. And so we're going to be studying kind of the process of making those decisions and using the community of those evaluation services and peer review to go through the whole cycle and say, Where was it beneficial? Why did we make that decision? Allow a little bit of that crowdsourcing feel to it. And so that's a small scale, but we're actually doing that by design to pilot it out and go through some of these thorny issues. But it's kind of with leaning into what you're offering, which is it's not likely to be a one-size-fits-all, but it's community-driven and researcher-led as well in terms of engaging in those specific asks in addition to what a traditional editorial office might seek too. So really, really good points.
So if I can kind of return to my opening comments, I think if we had a taxonomy of every possible assessment that would be possible for any given paper, when you have a paper come in, you can figure out a system to figure out which are the assessments that are actually needed in a peer review for that paper. And then you can find the appropriate people to do that. Maybe you can't find someone to do every part of that, but when you go to, if you go to publish it, if it meets certain criteria, you can say that this has been reviewed along these aspects. This could also benefit from review in these other areas, but at the time of publication, we were not able to secure a reviewer. And then at that point, open peer review, someone says, hey, look, that's my specialty. I'm going to do an open peer review. That kind of all gets jumbled together into a metadata glop that displays that XYZ has been reviewed at this journal and ABC has been reviewed by whoever in the wild, by our freelance reviewer. So that would be my answer to that question.
Thank you. 5 minutes. So sorry, you actually ended up standing. I don't know who of you came first, but
I'll be quick. My name is Thomas Woodson. I work for the National Science Foundation. Peer review appears all over the place. We do a lot of peer review. For a tenure process, there's peer review. You have any thoughts about how peer review should work in those settings, maybe funding world, where I am, or the tenure process world?
Springer Nature, I saw someone from Springer Nature. I saw something from Springer Nature that they, I guess they said how many reviewers that they have working for them in their network, like the number of peer reviewers, and it was a big number. I never thought about like what is the number of peer reviewers that these publishers have, and it like had lots of questions like what are the demographics of these reviewers, and maybe it would be interesting to know so if we think about peer review, it's not something that we normally pay for. But it's being compensated for, it's being subsidized by universities. So I think it would be interesting for universities to have some sort of report that lets them know like what it is they're subsidizing. So Springer Nature says we have 1 million reviewers, 10% of them are from MIT, Murray State. Go with Murray State. Sorry, MIT. If you show me a report that said 10% of the peer reviews were coming from Murray State, that would be something to kind of brag about. And I don't thinking about like university rankings. That's kind of a banal thing, but it is a big carrot and stick dynamic. So if you had that sort of data out there, like not just where your authors are publishing, but where they're reviewing, that's a little bit of a carrot and stick. Not that I think that's like a good carrot and stick, but it's one that exists and that has kind of shown to be effective. So I guess thank you. As far as tenure, I think make it more visible about what's happening. You don't have to make peer review open, but give institutions or employers a better idea of who at your institution, who you employ, what their sort of peer review activity looks like.
Were you referring to processes of peer review to review grants? And is that?
Yes, because we use peer review to review grants. And also, as a tenure person, you go to the tenure track, you gotta get peer reviews to make sure you can hire the next person. So that's peer review too.
Right.
Should we still do that? Get rid of it? Get good, bad? What are your thoughts about that peer review?
I think that a lot of the discussions, the problems that we have in the scholarly peer review applies to also all kinds. It's all about like the culture of giving feedback, but that's probably longer than 2 minutes that we have left. There are 3 more questions, and you're already giving up. What do we want to? Please, thank you.
I'll try to go fast. Maybe you can take half of the time. Annette Flanagan JAMA and the JAMA Network, your so-called bold name, or some might say dinosaur. I'm also executive director of the Peer Review Congress. Those of you who don't know that, the 10th quadrennial International Congress on Peer Review and Scientific Publication will be held in Chicago, September 2 to 5 next year. Call for abstracts will be released on Monday. I encourage you all to join us. And AJ, love the taxonomy idea. If you're not already doing it, I challenge you to build it, test it empirically, come to Chicago next year and present it, where we can all peer review it. Thank you.
One more minute.
Yes, this is Max Siebert, Harvard University. So one update on Elizabeth Big, AJ. She's now part of my former metrics team at Stanford, because actually, like every freelancer, she got some issues accessing articles. So even if you know you want to criticize research, you gotta do it from within. And then one comment on peer review and data sharing and all that we talked about today. I think I always peer review papers, even if I do not see, if I'm not an expert, because you can still have an influence of if they share data. You can force them to share the data. You can say, please share your protocol. Did you have a protocol? You can have so much impact on the methods already. And another thing that hasn't been touched upon, I think, is also that we're moving more into post-publishing peer review. That is going to be so much more important. And I think we're running out of time, but yeah, if you have some ideas on pub peer and post-publishing peer review, feel free. Thank you.
I think personally that post-publishing peer review is something that has always happened. It just hasn't happened publicly. And there are emerging mechanisms, PubPeer being one of them, for the opportunity to look again at a given piece of work. That's often couched in pejorative terms, but it can be part of a constructive process of correcting a direction or improving the understanding of a particular topic. So I'm personally all in favor of post-publication peer review because that's how science is done. I remember Harold Varmus, no less, telling a group of us at a meeting years ago that in his field of tumor virology, he knew of a dozen papers that were completely wrong. And there was, at that time, no mechanism for identifying those. It was known only to insiders like Harold. And the community is much broader, more diverse now. That kind of lore needs to be more widely known so that science can be more efficient and avoid going down dark and blind alleys. So I'm all in favor of developing mechanisms for robust post-publication peer review, not in a pejorative sense of dinging those responsible, but just recognizing that science is a process of discovery and we all make mistakes at times.
Thank you. And for those of us that think of preprints as publications, we've been talking about it all along. So, but thank you so much to all our panelists. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about the future of peer review. I hope that we can continue this discussion. There are emails. I'm always open to have conversations, and I'm sure that any of the panelists would love to continue these conversations here and after. So thanks again, and yeah.